Hello, Elliott. Welcome to the show.
Hi there, Park. Thanks for having me. Really great to get the opportunity to speak to you.
Awesome chatting with you. You are coming to us from Amsterdam area.
Yeah, even more obscure than that. So, Den Bosch, so about 1 hour south of Amsterdam, where we're suffering the hottest heat wave, I think, on record. So it's very warm at the minute. And I'm English, so I'm from the northeast of England, a place where I'm not really used to the sunshine or too much heat. So my brain is just surviving with the temperature so far.
And you're English, but you're in the Netherlands. What brought you out there?
Yeah, I've been lucky to jump around with different positions: Germany, Denmark, the Netherlands, and yeah, an exciting role brought me here. That role has come and gone, but the Netherlands is a really nice place to live, especially with a young family. So, and my wife is German, so it's nice in the middle between the UK and Germany, and this is where we call home.
Well, I love it out there. I was fortunate enough to spend 5 summers, a week to 10 days in Amsterdam every summer for 5 years when I was teaching a sustainable storytelling course at a master's program at Arizona State University. And our students were from around the world, and we would meet up in Amsterdam and work with a lot of your great companies out there, Philips Electronics,
Hmm.
Tony's Chocolates, the airport. I mean, the companies that were doing a lot in sustainability, and they would open their doors and we would go in and we would do little exercises and programs in each of those companies. And what I loved most about Amsterdam was the people. I mean, they were so nice, so friendly, so much fun. The food is great, the booze is great. It was just a wonderful, you know, respite out of my summers for 5 summers in a row.
Yeah, and it's got a really great international connection. Like all the scale ups and companies work here. The amount of different, cultures you've got working together, it's really unique, I think. And like you say, it sounds like you had a lot of fun, and I have to see if you can get you over for a sixth, seventh, and eighth time in the future.
I would love that. Now, you have just come out with this report, this State of Storytelling 2026, where you started looking at and dove into 25 different companies that are hiring this C-level leadership role of chief storytelling officer. And you dug into that to kind of figure out, I guess, what's going on. Where's this trend coming from? What's it about? I mean, what was your real motivation to go and do this research?
Yeah, I think a lot like you that I've been working in storytelling and narrative for a long time, and I've learned actually a lot of the times not to mention the words narrative or storytelling because it can be quite hard to sell internally within companies, especially at the C level. And something curious happened at the beginning of the year that I started to see a couple of roles emerge. So, director of narrative, head of storytelling, chief storytelling officer. And, sometimes these can be, a way to grab attention from a brand. But then I started to see enough of them that it felt like a trend and like putting that hand in hand with some of the things that had gone quite popular, which was you probably saw at the beginning of the year of companies were hiring storytellers and a lot of reaction to with AI taking a lot of our tasks away. What should we be doing? And so I thought I would start collecting them. And I think you know that what happens with these roles, they're live for like 3 days and then they disappear. So I learned to screen grab them pretty early. And I thought, let's see if collect 5 of them and see what I can learn, then 10. And then I got up to about 25. And I was quite strict with the criteria. I wanted head of positions, leadership, major companies and owning the narrative. They were the things that I wanted to. And, you can learn a lot from job descriptions. There's a lot of great data in there. And I think by getting those 25, putting them together in this report, I think I was able to kind of build a clearer picture of why this trend might be happening.
So give us your backstory in storytelling. How did you get into it? And why do you have this insatiable interest to go and do all this digging?
Yeah, so I'm from Newcastle, so the town in the northeast of England. It's obsessed with sport, and so I became obsessed with sport as well. And it's a great place for stories. I mean, you've got the World Cup going on over there now. It's just built for great storytelling. And that took me to start my career at the Adidas global headquarters in a town called Herzogenaurach in Germany. And yeah, I was building products, things that footballers would wear, football boots or the kits for national teams, for the Olympics. And over time, started to realize pretty clearly that my job wasn't really just to create technical products, but to create product stories. And looking at the marketplace, had always seen that the products that win are very rarely the best products. They're the ones that are able to communicate something very clearly and very strongly. And so over time, got the chance to work with people who I consider to be great storytellers and started to learn from them. And so I started writing and researching about storytelling around 10 years ago during my journey from the sports world into the tech world, where that's where I really saw a real need for great storytelling, where the markets were so crowded, the products were so complicated that they needed great storytelling. So since then, I've been working directly with companies, giving product narrative workshops where I help companies discover basically what is the story that they can tell better than anyone else in the market, and using my research and frameworks to help them achieve that.
Mhm. And now, when you were in the sports marketing storytelling business, you did some work and launched a major kit, as you said in your bio you sent over to me, with the New Zealand All Blacks, which, of course, are the very famous rugby team. And our son got into rugby in high school, just absolutely loved it. He's the one that really introduced me to the All Blacks, and it's been fun watching them over the years. Can you
Mhm.
give us a little bit of a story about what did you do there and how did you turn that into a story?
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? Because, you look at a sports kit and there's very few products that are more emotional. People treasure them, they pass them down. God, if you go to New Zealand, you won't go more than an hour without seeing an All Blacks jersey somewhere. It's a very meaningful thing. And I was very fortunate to have the responsibility of being the product manager for that. But it's a challenge, right? It needs to be all black. It's not much flexibility when it comes to design or how do you tell a story. And we were able to work together as a team and with the federation at the time to think, well, how do we tell something really unique? And we came across this quote, which was a Welsh player who once said, "There's something about the blackness of a All Blacks kit that sends a shiver down your spine." And this idea that they were so intimidating, and part of that intimidation came from those deep All Black kits. So why not lean into that? So we, worked with our great designers and developers to develop, the blackest kit of all time. So taking away the famous white collar, convincing sponsors to do very dark silver badges, which is not in their interest, but they bought into this story as well. And I think that's kind of the point, is that everyone knows that if the story works, then everything else clicks into place. It's easier for marketing, it's easier for sales. So it was a great lesson in understanding that if you get the story right, everything else is easier. But how do you do that? I know we've talked about it in our core park of, storytelling. When I asked anyone when I worked at Adidas or Asics, how do you tell a great story? People would say, I have no idea. Yet these were people who were creating and working with stories every day. So they knew how they were doing it, but they were doing it subconsciously. But they'd never taken a class, read a book, or really sat down to work out what is a story and why does it work. And that's the part that I got really interested in, and what led me to where I am today.
Yeah, we were cut from the same cloth, Elliot, because I was looking at story too when I was running my agency. And I was looking at a campaign we ran, and one spot pulled very well, and the other spot in the campaign didn't pull at all. And at the time, I couldn't figure out why until I studied story, and I realized that first spot was intuitively created as a perfect story structure, and it like increased same store sales 42% the next month, and people were coming in talking about it. The second spot did not do anything, and I realized, oh, it was just kind of a creative message. There was no story structure to it. And this was back in 2003. So I took it upon myself to say, all right, I need, and my agency needs to stop being intuitive storytellers and start
Mhm.
being intentional
Mhm.
storytellers. And that's what led me into really studying what makes a story work. How does it work? How can we use it? How can we be creative with the framework, but still be committed to that framework because we know how it moves people.
And I think that realization that you and I had in our careers is exactly what's happening in the market now. And that's why these roles are starting to come alive, is that a lot of these C-level executives have probably learned the hard way that making a great product, it just isn't enough anymore. And understanding and probably being quite frustrated looking at the marketplace of why are these competitors doing so well when their product isn't as good as ours, and realizing but their story is. So how do we, maybe we should invest in storytelling and not something small, something big. You know, you can probably see in the report, these are big salary brackets, these are big roles for big companies. So for me, what's exciting is that it seems to be waking up a little bit, and the credibility to the name of a head of storytelling is now coming to life, which is probably so exciting for you after you've probably been banging your head against the wall saying
Well,
these things.
for 25 years,
Yeah.
Elliot. I mean, it's like, where have these people been? You know, this just has been working since the beginning of time. It's not
Mhm.
just a trend right now. It's just how we Homo sapiens make sense out of the madness of being human beings. And so it works great. So what are you doing now? You are a fractional storyteller. Can you give our
Yeah.
listeners a little insight into that?
So the nice fancy term for it would be a fractional head of storytelling. So for anyone knows what fractional, I'm working with many companies, not one. I always try to explain it is that instead of doing 10 things for one company, I'm doing one thing for several companies. And that one thing is helping companies understand what is the story that they can tell better than anyone else in the market. Usually that can take between 3, 6, and 9 months, where I will go in and do three different elements. One is discovering their narrative, where actually it's not that much research, because what I found is that most companies don't need more data. They have a lot of it, maybe too much of it. And actually, that's why their storytelling is a little bit bad, because they're using too much. And we need to find out what is the important ingredients. What's the minimum amount of information we need to be able to tell this story. So that's number one. Number two is defining the narrative. And I always think this is the most difficult one, because marketing teams usually have no problem coming up with great narratives. They're very good at it. But how do you get everyone in the company, even those really difficult people, your head of sales, your head of legal, head of compliance, even your CEO, how do you get them, that group, to all go, I love it, let's do it? And so for me, that's where I come in with a specific technique and a process that I use to get a lot of people on board. And number three is delivery. And this for me is the most important, because I think where a lot of, from the agency side, my experience where it can fail is that you can deliver a great story or a narrative that everyone loves. And then 6 months you go back and you don't see it on the website. Maybe half the sales team is using it, the other half's not. Or it gets lost when a new feature comes out and a new story emerges that doesn't connect to the last one. And so for me, the delivery is adoption. How do you make sure that the narrative is created in a way that anyone in the company can pick it up and utilize it? And I think that's the challenge. So yeah, that's what I'm doing with my life now. And then in my spare time, I teach a Maven cohort where I use those companies as case studies to help people understand how they can be their own head of storytelling within a company, even if they don't have the title. Maybe they're a head of product marketing, maybe they're a CMO, and they understand storytelling is important. How can they approach it internally within their own company?
Hmm. So you talk about discovering the narrative, number one, defining then that narrative, number two, and then delivery, which leads to
Exactly.
adoption. And if they aren't adopting it, and again, like you said, after 6 months or onto something else, that it all falls down. It breaks down. All that work done in those previous 6 months is kind of all for naught. And we call that narrative entropy.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
it
it's a great.
happens everywhere. And we see it especially in large enterprises where they do exactly what you talk about. They find that narrative, they share the narrative, they don't get people to buy into it, and it just starts falling apart like anything would unless you had governance around it in one way, shape, or form. And that's kind of what to me anyways, your study found too, right? That that you've got these chiefs of storytelling being sought after, brought in, but are they given the infrastructure and the governance in which what we call story ops to be able to weave that narrative coherently and consistently throughout the organization?
Yeah, and the answer is some yes, some no, because one of the key findings we took from the report is that there are about 7 different reporting lines for these 25 roles. And I don't think that's a massive surprise. You know, a lot of different companies are trying to figure out what this role is and what it should achieve. And so it's a little bit split at the moment. But I think the ones that will succeed will build on what we were just talking about, Park, which is the ones that recognize that actually a head of storytelling probably shouldn't be spending too much time creating stories. They should be finding the stories that already exist and lifting them up, amplifying them, tweaking them, and getting everyone on board with them. And I think that's what my biggest learning from all of this has been, is that a head of storytelling creates alignment. And if we talk about, well, what is a successful story within a company? For me, the judge of success is if you speak to a few guys in sales, a few guys in product, and a few guys in market, and they're all saying roughly the same thing. That's success. That's alignment. And for me, that's why I start every one of my engagements with a really simple 3-question survey, which is what value does your product create? Who cares most about that value? And how can we make them believe that you're the best at creating this value? You know, those 3 questions you'd hope everyone in the company can answer. They're pretty simple things. And in my research, I found that on average, I get around 19% alignment, which is frightening, but not too surprising. I'm sure that a lot of your listeners have worked at companies where sometimes you sit down at lunch and it feels like you're working with 3 different companies because everyone's got a different opinion about what the product is and what makes it great. And it really goes back to this idea of how can you possibly convince people outside of the company what your value is if nobody, or only 19% of people inside the company, can agree where it is? And for me, that's what a head of storytelling does. It gets that 19% up to 60, 70, and 80%.
Yeah, because right now, 19%, let's look at the other side of that. That
Mhm.
means 81% of the people in your organization don't know what or how to tell your story.
Mhm. And I have the survey. I challenge all of your listeners to, add me on LinkedIn. I'll send them the survey as a Google form. Do not be scared of the results. And actually, it's a really great way to convince your C-level organization that you might need to invest in storytelling. Because the best thing, Park, is I ask people, go and ask your boss, what alignment do you think you'd have over these 3 questions? And what do you think they're going to say? They're going to say 60, 70, 80%. They're always going to go high because it's frightening for them to say anything lower. Then you come back to them with the results, and whatever budget you've been struggling to get, or whatever responsibility to own the narrative, that conversation is going to be a lot easier when that's staring into the face. Because just as we were saying, Park, convincing people on storytelling can be hard, but convincing someone on alignment, I mean, that's easy. Like, it's very easy for a CEO or CMO or anyone in the company to understand, but this is costing us money for us to only be 19% aligned. So it's a great weapon to use.
Yeah, I mean, that's the ultimate measure of narrative entropy.
Mm-hmm.
And no
Exactly.
organization wants any sort of entropy in any way, shape, or form. That's why they have marketing ops, sales
Ex-
ops, revenue ops,
yeah.
DevOps, why, FinOps, so that they have governance and infrastructure to be able to guide each one of those departments so that they're all producing for the whole. But
And
nobody has story ops.
yeah, well, maybe that's what we're seeing with this report, because that's kind of one of the things that when I got to the predictions was that we're going to see some convergence over time. It's going to be very experimental. There's going to be a lot of people who are hired with the wrong credentials. They're going to be fired too quickly. Um, but there are going to be ones who do it right, and that'll be the one that emulated. And I think what you're saying of storytelling ops is a great way to put it, because that's the way I see it, is that not this creative fancy role, but it's quite dirty work to get in there and influence people and to get everyone on the same page, and you've probably seen it as well, that, it works really well at a startup and early scale up stage, because you've got a founder who every day is in there beating his chest and saying, guys, this is where we're going. Follow me. I will lead you there. And everyone's aligned. But as you scale, and as companies these days scale incredibly rapidly, it's going to be so difficult for you to keep that narrative going when you become less founder led. And that's maybe when you replace your founder with a storytelling ops, whether that be one person, whether that be a process, and let's be honest, maybe even an AI agent or two in the future, because that's the way things are going. But the most important is this recognition, this final bit of recognition, especially from the tech industry, that having a good product isn't enough. We need to get our narrative great and we need to get it aligned.
So going back, you said you were looking at these and came across 25 different
Mhm.
job descriptions, but you said they only last 2 or 3 days online and then they're pulled down. Why is that? Because they're getting overrun with potential storytellers?
It's standard for any types of role. That's why I said you get some great data in here. So they don't want them live forever. It's salary data, especially in the US, who are very transparent about that. But reporting lines, you learn so much. I always say to someone when you're applying for a job, make sure to ask who am I actually reporting into and in what function and why. But yeah, that's why I was so keen to get a hold of this because there is some very sensitive and very revealing data in there. And as soon as the job is hired or they've got the number of candidates, it vanishes. So if you type in, for example, head of storytelling for Miro, which was one of the first ones I found, that's gone. But luckily, that's what I was able to do with this is get in a habit of screenshotting them. And really, when I started, I wasn't sure what I was doing. I was doing it for maybe for my own interest because I was learning from them. But then as I started to pull them together and get the patterns, I thought, this could be something I think a lot of people are interested in, especially in my world, Park, where I'm a product marketer. And that I know product marketing has always had, I think, a good claim to own storytelling in organization. And kind of my fear was that when these roles appear, they'll be used as more brand people or creative people will apply for them and get them rather than product marketers. And if you've read my work, you probably know why I think product marketing is so well fit, because to tell a story, you need to have a really good understanding of the product, a really good understanding of the audience, and a really good understanding of the market. And that person, if they're doing their job right, is the product marketer. But yeah, I think it's really interesting to look at those 25 roles and use it as a way to predict where this might be going in the future.
Yeah. And where do you think it's going in the future?
Yeah, I think really what this is, and we almost got to 30 minutes without mentioning AI, but here we're going to have to do it now because it's relevant. But I do see it as a big response to AI, and not just storytelling. I think that this might be the first of some very new job titles that we're going to see in the future. I think we're going to see a lot of new job titles across marketing and across a lot of different functions as we kind of come to terms that our roles are no longer our tasks. Because now we can hand over our tasks to AI quite efficiently. And it then asks the question, well, what do I do and where is my value? And for me, where the value is storytelling. And I know this is what you're really obsessed with as well, is that, if that's what I'm using artificial intelligence, what value is my human intelligence? And I think you would agree with me that I don't think there's any better display of human intelligence than the ability to create and communicate a great story. That's what makes us human. And I think that's why we're seeing this now as a response to how the market is changing. So I see this as the first of a few different job titles that might emerge.
So then the next question is, after reading through your study, do you think the people that are putting out these job descriptions actually know what they're asking for?
No, I think a lot of them are going on the title alone. I think they recognize that I think there's a big mix up between a skill and a function, right? Do you want someone who's highly skilled in storytelling in the organization? So I think some people are trying to attract talent, bringing someone in who's a great storyteller who can maybe one, create stories, and two, help others to create great stories. But then there are those other ones who you can see it really kind of clearly. I mean, I give some spotlight roles like the one at Amazon and the one at Anthropic, where they go a little bit more to making it clear that of owning the narrative. And I think that is the key statement. And I think so. I think that there's a few in there that recognize that actually, you don't have to be this kind of predictable great storyteller to own a narrative. It's almost like a scientific process. It's someone who can influence and knows the science of storytelling. And so I think it's going to be a mess for a while. A lot of them are going to get them wrong. I do see that as this is the next step, Park, is trying to get my hands on a few head of product marketings to ask them what their experience with. And you were kind enough to introduce me to a couple, but they're also quite elusive because it's quite new. But I do see that I'm excited to do a second step of this, of actually speaking to the people who are hiding these roles and go from predictions to some actual answers about what they actually did.
Well, and you are in a very unique position to be able to really put the study together and dissect what's coming out of it because of your role as a fractional head of storytelling. You've
Hmm.
worked with 100 plus brands
Hmm.
to help them do this thing, defragmentize their storytelling, to operationalize their brand storytelling, right?
Yeah, that's right, and that's why I've included a case study in the report, as I thought that would be a kind of missing part of it, to kind of show like what are you actually doing day to day, what are the KPIs, what does it look like week for week, and so I did a 4-month project with a company called Ingrid in Sweden, where it went extremely well and extremely quickly because of the reason that they really knew what they wanted from me, and they knew the importance of narrative, so it didn't take much influencing and struggle. And the other thing that you've probably noticed before, Park, is the reason why it works fractionally. Sometimes it's good to have an outsider come in, someone who isn't too emotionally attached, who doesn't know the full story. And it can be quite frustrating for the people who bring me in because I'm probably saying the same things that they have, but maybe it's the British accent, or maybe it's just being a British outsider. But I managed to get it signed off. And that the process I told you, the discovery, definition, and delivery, that definition part is the bit that I enjoy the most. It is the bit to get 5 very difficult people in a company who all have very different wishes and needs, to get them on board with the thing that I've written. Because once you've done that, if you get 5 influential people in the company who can all see their fingerprints on it, then everything else is really easy because they become your own champions to get the narrative through the organization. So that case study, for anyone wondering, can help maybe demystify what a head of storytelling is.
And the thing that really struck me about that case study, and this is for all of you out there that, have leaders reporting to you. I want you to picture your head of marketing, your head of sales, maybe your head of revenue, your head of finance, head of operations. Let's throw head of customer service in there.
Mhm.
And if you were to ask them to tell your story, only 1 out of 5 of those people can do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
And
unbelievable.
and then you think of, a lot of the companies are B2B. Think of the sales, like the timeline. It could take a year to a year, 2 years sometimes. And how many brand touch points is that? So, if you're having around 79 brand touch points, which I think is the industry average now, how many are you hearing? 79 different stories? And what does that do to your buyer's confidence? And this is the type of language to use to your sales team, because you know what it's like. The sales might be, storytelling, it's marketing fluff. But when I say to sales, they're naturally competitive people. And if you can make it clear that, forget storytelling, what I'm telling you is alignment. And if you can get every single one of your salespeople on every brand touch point, not saying 20 things, but the same 2, 3 things over and over and over, you're closing the deal, your timeline will come right down. And this is what you need for each function in the organization. You can't say the same thing. You need to be able to explain storytelling and how it brings benefit to them. And that's the key to getting that defined
Mhm.
narrative. And then your big problem is the delivery. And that's a whole challenge on itself.
So something that you really got me thinking about after reading your report is this kind of new reframe or definition of this particular position. And let's take Chief Storytelling Officer
Yeah.
off the table. We're not going to call
Yeah.
it that. So let's back into it through an ops mentality. Your CFO, who heads up financial ops, probably is a CPA, is very studied in numbers and finances and knows how business, operate, P&Ls and balance sheets and everything else, and then applies that to an operations mindset in order to make that company run as financially efficient as possible. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I say that's true for sure. Yeah.
Okay, let's go to marketing. Marketing is someone who's probably have gotten a degree, maybe a master's in marketing. They studied the art of marketing. They've read everything about marketing that they can think of. They've got great experience, and they are trying then to combine that with an operations mindset
Hmm.
because they have to drive revenue for the enterprise.
Yes.
Fair enough?
Fair enough.
So this new position is someone like you and I
Hmm.
who have we have the marketing background, advertising background, branding in my case, in your case, but we have also really studied story. We don't just do it intuitively anymore. We know intentionally what triggers to push, what strings to pull, how to craft a story to make it make sense to that buyer. And we need to have an operations mindset because we first have to get the internal operations across every op going to understand and be able to embrace and to articulate the overall brand narrative
Hmm.
before we go outside the organization. So it is a storytelling discipline with an operations mindset.
Yeah, and look, the way I've explained it is there's no one in the organization whose life doesn't get easier by the narrative being aligned and straight. Sales, marketing, finance, legal, C-level, to the people in every part of their organization, your job gets easier if you have answers to those three questions. What value does your product create? Who gets the most from that value? And why are you the best at delivering it? So for me, that's the context. And I think that's the missing word, that a lot of these companies don't have the context for what is a great story. Because there's nothing easier to say, I don't like that story. But what you want is to build a storytelling culture, or storytelling ops, like we're saying, that people can go, well, I don't like that because it's missing conflict, or it's reaching the wrong audience. For people to understand that there's a science to it, and there's a way to discuss it that holds people accountable for the story. And I think this is something that none of us have been trained in. A lot of people are doing it very well, maybe blindly, but then maybe that's not enough anymore. And just to your point, Park, is now's the time to get efficient and operational with it. And the ones that do are the ones who are really going to win, because the markets are only going to get more crowded. The products are only going to get more complex, and the features are only going to get more similar to one another. So narrative is really going to be the differentiator in this AI age of product.
Out of everything you looked at in this report, the 25 different job descriptions and your findings, what was your biggest surprise to you?
Well, I thought a welcome surprise was the high salaries, because I really thought this would be seen as a creative, fun, younger role where someone comes in with a lot of energy.
Hey, us old people could be fun too.
That's very true. Uh, but look, I think on the salary scale, one of the rules went up to 500,000 a year. And I think that's a great indication that this is, you don't pay that kind of money unless you've got a very clear understanding that narrative is going to contribute to return on investment. They're planning to get that back. No one's going to waste that money. So I found that really reassuring. That, okay, when I started to think, is this just a trend? Is this just a thing, a role where you get a nice little office and they maybe invite you into a couple of meetings now and then, and it's kind of cool. We've got a head of storytelling, isn't that? Aren't we forward thinking? We send them to do keynotes and make the decks look a bit prettier. But yeah, that the job descriptions themselves, and that's why I encourage your audience to look through them. When you see the language used combined with the salary, it is reassuring that that this is being taken seriously, and that's the thing I'm most excited about. That this is something that's going to get more credible and tangible.
Yeah. Were you able to talk with some of those people I referred you over to?
Yeah, I was able to talk with them, but I was under, and this is maybe really revealing as well, that a lot of them ones that are doing it don't want to really let people know that they're doing it. Even had one person say, "Look, I don't even want to do this anonymously because they're acting as a head of storytelling, but it's that they don't shout about it. They don't have their title on LinkedIn, and they see themselves almost like a secret weapon within an organization, which is I think is really revealing as well as that maybe this trend that I'm seeing, I'm using job descriptions to do it, but that might be the tip of the iceberg because a lot of brands might have hired internally for this and say, you're going to act as a head of storytelling, but we're not going to publish it because we see this as we don't want everyone else doing the same as us. So what's the point? So no, if anyone out there who's listening is doing this role and is willing to talk to me, this is research I want to continue doing. So I welcome them to reach out to me. But yeah, it's a little bit elusive at the moment, which is quite exciting as well.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, all new territory. And we have been, working with our Story Cycle Genie, which is the StoryOps platform, because in it, of course, you can build your brand narrative strategy and then all of your content, and everybody in the organization has a single source of truth about that brand story. I ran your brand through it, sent it over to you. What did you think of the output?
Yeah, I really liked it. There was definitely some home truths there because my brand is definitely something I'm building slowly and trying to start small and very clear. But no, I think the way I think about myself and my brand, your research really picked up on it, but it definitely inspired me to maybe dig into it a little bit deeper. And I do get the feeling when I was reading it, wow, less is more, right? That actually, I want to challenge myself in the future to communicate what I do and the value with as little words as possible. And I think that was what, when I read it, I was like, that kind of inspired me to dig into that and challenge myself a little bit more.
Yeah. And in your experience with working with, lots and lots of brands on pulling their narrative together, getting them to stop their own narrative entropy, and what you've seen in the research, how do you see a tool, a narrative native platform like the Story Cycle Genie that is truly built as story ops? How do you see that working inside of an enterprise, and or their reluctance to put something like that in?
Yeah, the reluctance I think comes from one, what we're talking about. Do they recognize nobody wants to solve a problem that they don't really recognize or they don't really fear? And I think that's changing and will drastically change. The next, I think, comes from what does this truly offer to have something like that is transparency. And it's such an underrated thing in an organization because when we talk about this 19% alignment, I think the big misunderstanding is that there's that doesn't mean that everyone disagrees on what the story should be. It just means maybe people think they're telling the right story, but they're working from an old deck or from something else. It's just misinformation. And I think that's where something like this can be really helpful to say, wait, where do I need to go to get the most up to date information so I know when I'm speaking to a customer, when I'm building a campaign, or whether I'm developing a feature, I'm doing it with this context in mind. And the companies that are able to build a tool or hire a role that can encourage that are going to see massive benefits because alignment and transparency, they might not seem very sexy things to invest in, but once you get them right, and you asked me about my experience, they're the companies I see doing very well, where everyone seems to know what it is they do and why they're amazing. Those are the ones that are the ones that are succeeding and scaling very quickly.
And how are you seeing enterprises using AI as a story ops tool, or are they just not doing it yet?
No, I see a lot of different things, and I think the idea of having a shared agent is a really good idea. So you can't always reach the same people as an organization. So I see a lot of product marketing teams developing agents for their sales team, for example. So so if they're in a meeting and they just need to, hey, can you take this one bit of copy and rewrite it for this customer? something that might have been on an email 5 years ago to a poor product marketing person who's like, I've already done this. It's on slide 56. Just go read it. And I think that's the frustration for a lot of product marketers, is that they've actually created the content to create alignment, but it just doesn't get adopted. However, that's where an agent, I think, could solve it. So I do see a lot of benefits there. But I think one of the things that I wrote about in the report is this idea that execution has become cheap, but meaning has not. And so, yes, you're going to be able to execute things that will help tell your story at a higher scale. But what we need to be doing is using that time saved to better understand what is it we're trying to say, and what's the difference between a good story and a great story? I often think
Mhm.
that's something that's not really understood well enough. And hopefully, if AI is taking away all of those tasks, what we can do is spend more time figuring that out. Because if we figure that out, then the rest is easy.
Yeah. Where can people learn more about you and what you do, and where can they find your new report?
Yeah, so the report is completely free to download. You can either join my newsletter and you get it sent to your email box directly, or you can just go to my LinkedIn and you'll find it right there, and you can just click it and download it. And the other thing, yeah, I teach storytelling as a function 4 times a year on Maven. So if this does sound like something that people want to invest in, or they've been curious about how to storytelling, I usually work with around 25 marketeers and product people and help train them over 4 weeks. So you can feel free to reach out to me there. And yeah, all my books are available via my website at productnarratives.com.
And what is Maven? I'm unfamiliar with that.
Yeah. I mean, you should get into Maven. Maven is just a really smart, great platform who I don't work for. This is completely free. But that allows you to run a cohort. So instead of just, uploading videos to do a course, which, the research shows that you tap out pretty quickly when you have to just watch continuous videos, but you can put all of your curriculum up there, host a few webinars. And yeah, it's a platform where people can do a cohort together. And so, yeah, it's a really nice way. For me, one thing I haven't mentioned is my love for teaching, and that's the bit that I really love. So I like to get 25 people together, and if you've got a product that you need help with a narrative, you bring it into the cohort, and you don't just have me, but some other very talented people on the cohort who can help point us in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, very cool. Elliott, thanks for being here on the show, and thanks for doing all this research. I found it absolutely fascinating because, like you, at the beginning of this year, I started seeing all these articles about the interest in hiring chief storytelling officers, and I'm like, I've been doing this for 25 years. Why is it sexy now?
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping it's going to make your life. I said it makes everyone in the organization's lives easier. I hope it makes your life easier as well, because now, it's getting harder and harder to argue that storytelling isn't one of the most important things to invest in as a business and as a person. And now we've got some nice research to back it up. So I hope it makes your life easier.
I appreciate that, Elliott, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
You're welcome.